Hey, well, hello everyone and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you're just logging in and joining us, I'd like to invite you to introduce yourself via the chat. Please type in your name and organization name if you would like. My name is Genevieve Kirk, and I'm the Center for Nonprofit Excellence Director at the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois. Last year, our organization conducted a needs assessment with local nonprofit leaders, and we heard that one of the biggest needs that organizations have is for fundraising strategies. So we have developed this discussion for you today called Introduction to Capital Campaigns. It's the first session in a series that we'll be offering called Foundational Fundraising, offered to support nonprofits so you can increase your knowledge on fundraising strategies to support your mission work. And I'd first like to begin just by acknowledging you, our nonprofit leaders, and thanking you for undertaking this hard work. There are so many worthy causes in our community, but a finite amount of philanthropic funds available. So nonprofits have to be realistic, organized, and resourceful when considering running a capital campaign. And early stage steps can be a big help. So just wanted to start by clarifying, for those of you who are new to capital campaigns, what do we mean when we say this? This definition comes from Henry Hank Rosso. So to raise a specified sum of money within a defined time period to meet the varied asset-based needs of the organization. So in other words, they're targeted fundraising efforts that take place over a set period of time and can enable an organization to raise funding necessary for growth. The money could be for capital assets, intangible assets, endowments, debt reduction or elimination. Just to keep a couple of housekeeping notes as we begin our session. First, a friendly reminder to please keep your microphone on mute during the panel discussion. You are welcome to use the chat function to submit questions. We will offer a dedicated time of Q&A towards the end of our session, so please take note of your questions and you can submit them at that time. And a reminder that this session is being recorded for the benefit of participants who were unable to join the live Zoom session today. So with that, I would like to introduce you to 4 local leaders who have undertaken capital campaigns at their organizations. They are really our experts today on this topic. And our goal today is to have them tell you what they did, what they learned, and how you can apply these strategies when considering if a capital campaign is right for your organization and when. So our panelists today, I'm going to go in alphabetical order, are Tracy Barkley, who is beginning her 10th year as director of Sola Gratia Farm. Tracy earned a BS in ethology, ecology, and evolution, and a master's in natural resources and environmental sciences from the University of Illinois. She has a passion for feeding, empowering, and enriching our community's nourishment and health. Next, we have Stephanie Record, the executive director of Crisis Nursery in Urbana, who has been leading the organization for nearly 15 years. Stephanie is a licensed clinical social worker with Masters of School of Social Work and Master of Education in Organization and Leadership degrees, all of which were received from the University of Illinois. Then we have John Salvani, who is Associate Dean for Advancement at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, serving as the Chief Advancement Officer for the College of Fine and Applied Arts. John has been in higher ed fundraising for almost 18 years. He's a member of several local and national volunteer leadership boards, including Pi Sigma Epsilon, Champaign County CASA, and the Association of Fundraising Professionals. And last, we have Mary Tiefenbrunn. She has a BA in drama from Hofstra University and a JD from Loyola University Chicago School of Law. In 2007, she accepted the position of executive director of the Champaign County Humane Society, where she continues to enjoy using her management skills and legal expertise to serve the animals and animal lovers of Champaign County. Will you please join me in welcoming virtually our panelists today? Thank you so much for being here. Okay, and with that, I wanted to just ask an opening question to all of our panelists. Why don't we take this in alpha order as well? If you could please introduce yourself and tell us when, how, and why your organizations decided to run a capital campaign. So we'll start with Tracy.
Great. Thanks so much, Genevieve. I'm director of Solar Grove Farm, and our farm is a ministry of St. Matthew Lutheran Church and started 12 years ago to address food security in our community. We grow fresh vegetables and make them available to, throughout the community, but donate about a third of everything we grow. We've been growing on both the campus of St. Matthew Lutheran Church in Southeast Urbana, and then have expanded over the last decade to farm on 15 acres. And we knew that leasing all of this land was going to have to change at some point, that wasn't a long-term strategy for us, but we were really catapulted into a capital campaign when 5 critical acres of our operation were sold last year. And so we started our capital campaign this last August, started planning for it last January, February. And I'm the new kid on the block here. I am in the midst of our first capital campaign. So I am going to share what I've learned just in the last few months, and look forward to learning from the other panelists today as well. Thank you.
And Stephanie, we'll have you go next.
Okay, so at Crisis Nursery, we originally had received some money from the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity to do a small expansion of like 1 or 2 little offshoots of our rooms, and to do kind of an improvement of our building. And then when that money didn't come through for several years, we had to kind of regroup. So when we were finally able to get that money, we realized our needs were much greater than what that funding would supply. So we decided we needed to add to that with our own capital campaign fundraising effort. So we were really finding ourselves in a situation where our building wasn't meeting the needs of the children we were serving, and we needed more space. We were having to turn families away. The space that we had wasn't really functional for the needs of the children and the safety and security that we expect here at the nursery. So that's kind of when we really kind of launched into our capital campaign project, and that was in 2014. So it's been a little bit. We've been in our new space for about 7 years now, but that's why we decided to do that. And, you know, that was kind of our why.
Thank you so much. And John.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is John Silvani. I'm, as Genevieve said, I am the Chief Advancement Officer here for our College of Fine and Applied Arts at the University of Illinois. I think all of you are pretty familiar with the University of Illinois. The area that I support in my advancement efforts is our College of Fine and Applied Arts that deals with the visual arts, performing arts, and our environmental arts, which is our architecture, landscape architecture, urban planning programs. So, you know, an institution like ours in higher ed, and especially the size of this university, we're actually always in a campaign mode of some sort, right? We're rolling off of one campaign into the next campaign. And, you know, and each campaign serves a different purpose, right? And a certain set of priorities. This particular campaign that we just completed, the With Illinois campaign, was our most ambitious campaign in the history of the university. It started back in the silent phase, was back in 2013, pretty soon after we finished our Billion Futures campaign prior to that. So, you know, we always start planning into a campaign in order for us to continue our fundraising momentum and initiatives. But primarily so that way we can start focusing on new fundraising priorities for the university, for the individual colleges, so that way we have a reason for going ahead and continuing on with a with another capital campaign.
Thank you. And Mary. Mary, I think we need you to unmute.
Thanks. Sorry about that. I'm very bad at that. We started thinking about our capital campaign in probably 2015. And then went ahead with a feasibility study in 2017. Our main reason was that our existing building was completed in 1988, so it was starting to show a lot of wear. We're very hard on our building. We needed a completely new HVAC system. We lacked space for a lot of functions like office space, space for staff meetings, space for education programs, space for dog behavior and training. And our animal housing was no longer really up to standards in the animal sheltering industry. We felt like the animals really deserved better housing under our care. So those were our motivating reasons. And then we did the feasibility study in 2017. And as we moved through all the steps of the capital campaign slowly, we would find more needs. So it certainly did grow, but we just moved into our new building March 14th. So happy to be here and happy to be at this point.
Great, thanks, Mary, and congratulations on that milestone of getting into your new space.
Thank
Well,
you.
my next question is really for any of our panelists to jump in on. If you can just tell us briefly, what is the purpose of running a capital campaign and what can it do for your organization outside of usual fundraising efforts? Who wants to jump in on this one?
I'll
I'll
start.
jump in.
Oh, yep. Tracy, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think it gives you a great opportunity to connect with the type of donors that are really interested in and exciting about a bricks and mortar project. If they're out there, and it gives you the opportunity to connect with them and other people who are interested in the sort of high visibility, high impact gifts. And then of course the opportunity to continue and maintain those relationships is really what that's the long game.
Yeah, I was going to say it also, it really gives an opportunity to provide a sense of an organized effort to raise money, right? Where you're not feeling like you're going out there and trying to throw all these different priorities at donors to see which one would resonate with them. It helps to provide that kind of structured approach and gives you an opportunity to even think of goals and how that helps. I've been fortunate enough to work at a couple universities where one of them actually had their first capital campaign ever in the history of the university. And a lot of it was because there were so many priorities that we wanted to make sure we kept our eye on. And by doing so, an organized approach through a capital campaign was going to be the best approach in order for us to do that in a more structured effort with our donors that we were working with and donor prospects that we were looking to cultivate into being able to support that campaign.
I'll hop in too. I think from our standpoint, it was a really unique opportunity to kind of pull from our grassroots donors that had been with us from the beginning and really pull everybody back around our mission. So it was just a unique way to kind of get everybody back together for a common mission. And then I think, I'll echo what the others have said, just having that focus on a specific goal of building the building, expanding the building, and the reason why it was necessary really made it impactful for us.
Yeah, I think for our farm, specifically our capital campaign is to purchase land and build a building, a permanent home for us. And I think it allowed for a lot of people that know us in one way to see the full scope of our work. I think that's what's been really surprising for a lot of our donors and people who have been engaged in the campaign is they might interact with us at Market or CSA or be part of one of our partner programs, but it's allowed for them to see the scope of our work and also contribute to some longevity and sustainability for our operation. We're, just a 12-year organization, and I think it has allowed for us to kind of expand the scope of what we might be able to do in the future also with this permanent home.
Super, those very good points, and I appreciate the different perspectives you each had on that. My next question is specifically for Mary. Just thinking about all the organizations on the call today, they're wondering, when is the right time, or should I be thinking about running a capital campaign? So if you can tell us, how do you know if running a capital campaign is the right move for your organization?
I think that you need to do a little bit of a self-assessment, and there's a lot of things you can find online about what you need to have in place before you proceed with a capital campaign. But you definitely need to have systems in place of logistics for donor correspondence and acknowledgement, donation tracking. You need to have some staffing. Essentially, you definitely need a person to work with you, a development person, whether that is a paid staff member or a really committed volunteer. That could, you could go that way as well, but you definitely need additional staffing to do this campaign. And you need a well-functioning board of directors. I think you also need to look at your reputation and your history. You need to have started to develop a reputation for stability and stable leadership. I think that's important before you try to launch a campaign where you're asking for larger gifts and a long-term commitment. And you need to look at, really honestly, whether you're going to be capable of succeeding in fulfilling the purpose of the campaign. You have to know that you can pull that off, and that you have the resources to run the campaign itself. I think those are the key things you need to consider first before you think that you're ready to start that next phase, which would be maybe doing a feasibility study with a consultant, which gives you such great information to start with. But I'll just end it there.
Thank you so much. And in terms of that self-assessment piece that Mary just referred to, I did want to let folks know who are joining this call that Community Foundation does have a few tools, including that kind of survey tool that you could use to assess readiness. And if you registered via the Eventbrite for this session today, I'll be sharing those to all registered participants in an email tomorrow as a handout. So something that you could use. And then Stephanie, this question is along the same lines, but what else would you like to add to this discussion in terms of determining an organization's readiness for launching a campaign?
Yeah, so I'll definitely tag on to one of the things Mary said, and that is just like the reputation in the community and your ability to show that you are fiscally accountable and that you've had a history of that leadership, I think, in your organization. I'm a social worker by trade, so this was way out of my comfort zone. So that feasibility study was really critical for us, finding a quality consultant to help guide me through that process, and just our campaign committee as a whole was really, really important for me. I know I couldn't have finished it, completed it, or done any of those things without that guidance, because that just wasn't in my wheelhouse. But I think the other piece of pulling that together was having a strong board, but also a strong campaign committee. So we had people that weren't on our board that wanted to participate in helping drive that fundraising effort. So that was really key for us, again, to pull in outside community members. I think the other thing was just really looking at realistically maybe we had a wish list of what we wanted, but what was most critical, and prioritizing where we were going to place those funds. And so having a really solid plan in place for us was important to put together our messaging for our donors. So it was very concise, it was really direct, and it was very focused on the number of children we had to turn away and say no to. So we had a really core messaging that was going out to our donors. I think sometimes it can get really broad and busy and have lots of information, but we really stuck to that messaging, which made it helpful.
Thank you so much. Both of you addressed consultants in your responses, so there might be some questions via the chat when we get to our Q&A about that. I can let you all know that I sat in actually on a call last week for the Midwest Center for Nonprofit Leadership, which is out in Kansas City. They were doing a fundraising tools series on demystifying capital campaigns. That was a consultant who ran that session, and I asked the question, what are the biggest red flags that you see from the consultant standpoint when an organization thinks it's ready to run a campaign, but really is not? And the first thing that was shared is lack of clarity on what the organization wants to see happen and what they'll do with the funds raised. So just being absolutely clear and specific on why you're doing it. And then secondly, donor relationships must show track record of donors, and that those relationships have to be there, not just one or two high level, but kind of a large groundswell of support for the effort. So just thought I'd throw that in there. Moving along. So we've heard a little bit about phases, organizing your campaign. So this one is for Tracy. Tell us what planning steps are involved in running a capital campaign and who should you involve in this process?
All right, so for us, this really was a board conversation for a while. And at the board level, we talked about our funding goal and timeline first. We decided to have a private phase and then a public phase. So we ran a private fundraising phase for a couple months. And we were advised early on that not to open it up to the public until we'd reached 51% of our fundraising goal. So we actually were able to do that in just a couple of months. And so hit the public mark sooner than we expected, which was good. But then we really talked about funding tiers. So what level of gifts we were going to be asking for, knowing that there, would only be probably a few large ones and more folks giving lower on the funding tier. We talked a lot about our audience and the timeline of who to talk to when. So we definitely started with our close partners and our CSA members and our volunteers and the folks that have been with us all these years first. And that was really in our private phase, and then have kind of circled out from there. We still really haven't gone to a full-on public. We're still kind of in the warm phase of talking to people that we already know for fundraising. We were very careful about our messengers. So our messengers have been really myself, our farm manager, our board members, and then a few close partners. And I think probably the next phase is adding another tier of folks that can be, expanding the circle of potential donors. We spent a lot of time developing materials. So we're a pretty tight budget operation, and this is the first time that we were really putting together a suite of professional materials. So we spent a lot of time on that, and that has been a huge piece of our campaign. And it's helped also, I think, provide some confidence for our board members and kept everybody on message. The other steps that were really important to us is to be ready with the thank you materials and follow-up materials. That's especially important to me. I actually am, I care a lot about the relationships, and we're really careful to make sure that we still have personal relationships with everybody. So, the follow-up phone call, the person-to-person ask, the immediate thank you, like that was really important to me. So we put that together pretty much hand in hand with developing the ask materials. And that's, I think, taken more time than we anticipated internally. So that would be something I'd share with everyone, that if this is a new sphere for you, I think that the time spent with the follow-up is a priority, and it's taken more time than we anticipated. Yeah, and then I'm sure there are more steps down the road, but that for us is what the steps we've taken, and then who we've involved is really so far just been kind of the close supporters of our organization so far, and then we'll see who's next in the next stage.
Thank you. John, I was hoping, especially with all your background at Illinois, just can you detail for us a little more common phases, benchmarks when running a campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the most simplistic terms for the phases of a campaign, and Tracy actually mentioned it in hers earlier, you have your private, your silent phase, right? And then you have your public phase. So those are really the two big phases of a campaign. Chances are you're going to probably spend more time in the silent phase than you would be in the public phase, because the silent phase is basically where, like Tracy, Mary, Stephanie, they've all shared, that's where a lot of the planning starts happening, the research, talking to any philanthropy management consulting firms. Like we use GG&A for that stuff, and they would do feasibility studies and let us know whether we're ready, what we should be looking for in our next campaign. For organizations who are looking to go into their first capital campaign, they would be able to help tell you whether you're ready to go into that campaign and to be able to do your campaign. Because obviously when you want to go into campaign mode, the goal is you want to be successful in it. And because there's going to be so many stakeholders involved to help you get across the finish line there with your campaign. And so, a lot of that planning and trying to figure out what the campaign looks like, the priorities that you want to focus on, your donor portfolios and the prospects that you want to reach out to, and even benchmarking from a previous campaign, if you had a campaign prior. For us, when we're constantly in campaign mode, one of the things we look at is how many brand new donors did we bring in our past campaign, and how do we cultivate and steward those relationships to bring them on to supporting us in the next campaign with hopefully an even bigger gift, right? So I think that's one of the things you think about as you go through the silent phase of the campaign. And then of course, once you are ready to launch and share with the public and bring it out there about your campaign, then that's the public phase. And as Tracy mentioned, with her campaign, they decided they didn't want to go public until they had about 51% to goal, right, Tracy? I think is what you said. That's the typical industry standard, right? When you get ready to go into the public phase of campaign, many organizations wait till after they've already raised at least half. Some even dip down to 40%, just so that way they can, accelerate maybe the conversations a little bit more with their donors. But typically 50% or higher is what you want to raise, because you want to be able to say, we've already raised this much towards our campaign goal. So usually the public phase is that's when you're sharing the good news about the campaign you've planned, right? And all of the lead work from the years prior going into the public phase of the campaign. That's when you have all your materials ready. That's when you have your branding ready. If you've decided to have a separate branding initiative for this campaign in particular, themes, priorities, all that stuff. This is where all of that will come out, and what your goal is, as you shoot for what you are looking for in a goal for your campaign. From my experience, going realistic is important, but giving yourself a bit of a stretch, because that's the reason for a campaign, right? You want to try to be able to raise money for whatever priority or goal you have, but you certainly want to try it in a more ambitious way, because there's going to be other priorities that will probably sneak in there that would be helpful in your efforts during your campaign. So those would be the two. And then, a lot of the benchmarks are going to be set based upon what and how you get through your campaign all the way to the end.
Thank you, John. That is helpful. And this is going a little off script. Don't want to put anyone on the spot, but when you mention goals, I do think it would be helpful for our audience participants to know, with your campaign, what was your organization's goal and where did you end up? If any of you would be willing to share, I think that could be useful. Or where are you at now if yours is still running?
Yeah, I can share the goal. It's a little bit of a different scope on our end because we're a pretty large organization here, but this With Illinois campaign that we just finished was our most, as I shared before, was our most ambitious goal, our most ambitious fundraising campaign in the history of the university. Our goal was $2.25 billion. That's with a B.
Wow.
$2.25 billion. We finished at a little over 2.7 billion. We were very fortunate actually to cross that finish line during a pandemic. So that was wonderful news for us. And then obviously all of our colleges kind of bubble up into that goal. So out of that 2.2 $1.25 billion goal. Like in my college, we accounted for 65 million of that, and we finished at just shy of 87.5 million in the college.
Anyone else want to follow that? I'll go ahead. So we made a mistake, I will say, in that we only shared our first phase goal in the beginning because we didn't want to scare anyone with the big ask. But our first phase goal was 1.5 million, and our overall goal now is 2.75, although it keeps creeping up because of construction costs. And so we are at about 1.8 million raised right now.
And ours was about 10 years ago now, so I'm sure it would be way more expensive now, but we had a $1.9 million goal. We kind of did a similar release of that goal. We did 1.4 on the front end and then upped it to the 1.9, and we're able to surpass that once the money from the state actually did come through. We ended up with a little bit more of a surplus, which was helpful, but yeah, I can only imagine our goal would be probably double that now, given the expenses of everything.
Great, thank you. Stephanie, I'm going to stay on you because you have had a little time for reflection back on your campaign. Can you tell us what surprised you about, the experience of running a capital campaign, and what did you learn through that process?
So many things. So when I learned every day, I was learning something. There were probably three key pieces that really had an impact, I guess, on our campaign that maybe I wasn't expecting or had to kind of learn as it went. But we had a lot of donors when you were asking for money who were like, well, I could provide this service for free or do an in-kind, service for you. So maybe someone could do the electrical, or maybe somebody could do, and so all of those things sounded really appealing, like, oh, that would be great, we don't have to pay for that. And so I really had to lean in with our architect and builder to really talk through different scenarios of that. So one of the things that was key for us is that our architect was just really clear, saying, while that is great, when you have people doing things in kind for you, it can totally stall the project. You're relying on their timeline. They aren't required to kind of stick with a timeline of like someone who's maybe getting paid for that. And so, for me, it was just a different thought process. I'm like, well, that makes sense. So, we didn't do a lot of those in-kind donations. We had anybody interested in that to kind of work with the builders who were providing the bids and things like that. That caused a little bit of ruffled feathers for some of our donors, but I think, again, we were very grassroots when we started, and we were growing into a much larger organization. So I think it was just a shift in how we thought about that. So that was one piece. And then I think when we worked with our consultant, they told us, that typically a capital campaign won't impact like your annual budget fundraising. So that was one of our concerns, is if we're going to go ask one of our donors for this large capital campaign gift, are they going to continue to give their normal annual gift because we have to raise our budget every year? That had more of an impact than what they kind of led us to believe. There were donors that did the capital campaign gift that maybe pulled back on their annual gift for those couple of years, and it all came back to where it should be after the campaign was over, but it did have a different impact than what we were kind of anticipating. And then I think, gosh, you gather your committee and your team, and you gather your donors, and you get pledges. And so a lot of pledges are over the 3 to 5 year period, depending on, what your goals are and how you're trying to bring that money in. And we were pretty confident that, the people we were getting pledges from would follow through. And, they tell us to count on a certain percent that wouldn't, but, we still were confident. We know these people, they've been with us for a lot of years. They're going to definitely fulfill their pledge. And, you have people move, you have people, get divorced. I mean, things you wouldn't necessarily anticipate. You have people who, pick up another mission or another focus. And so some of those things, with even board members that we thought, oh, board members will definitely, follow through with that. We had some of those pieces that we had to navigate through the process. overall, I would say we had very few people default on their pledge. And if they did, it was maybe the last payment or toward the end of the campaign, like their campaign promise. So we did really well with collecting those, but I think just having an understanding of what that might look like as you're getting pledges, as you're bringing in donations, and that it might look a little different as you're kind of collecting those last pieces.
Thank you, Stephanie. And Stephanie just mentioned board members. So that brings me to Mary. That's my next question. Tell us, what role do board members play in a campaign, the plans and overall strategy? And then how do you keep them informed and educated throughout this process?
Yeah, I think it's probably fairly obvious that the board has to be quite involved. It's a board level decision to enter into a campaign because it's all about your allocation of resources and execution of your vision and your mission. So they definitely play a big role as you're leading up to, making a decision about something. So this is such a huge thing for your organization to undertake, and you really need their buy-in. Because as an executive director, I mean, this is going to take up a huge amount of your time, and the whole organization is going to be focused on it. And so the board has to be 100% behind it. I think, and then once the decision is made, board members should be some of your biggest givers to the campaign. You as an organization, you're going to be asking people to dig deeper, to maybe take what they annually give, but then, make this one-time gift of maybe at least a third of what they give annually. That's one of the standards that we heard. And that's, you talk about very openly that we're asking you for an additional gift, not an instead of gift. So your board needs to, your members of the board need to be big givers. They need to be comfortable asking others to do something. And so they need to have set that example. I think, and this number is just my opinion, that you're at least 25% of your steering committee that's going to run the campaign should be board members. You want board members on that steering committee for a lot of reasons. One is that it's great to have some committee members that are already your allies, that are already on your board, already know your history. That helps you as the director in guiding that committee, to have the board members there who also are very familiar with the organization. It also helps as you're going to report to the full board. It's nice to have other board members who were at the meeting with you and who also heard what the consultant's advice was, so that they can weigh in case anybody, questions you or disagrees with the approach. You have some allies on the board who have also seen the same information. Also, some of your board members are going to be the best members on your committee to take leadership roles. So the way a committee is structured, you're going to have captains, and you're going to have different roles, different committee members stepping up to be in charge of different things. And sometimes the board members who you've already have a track record with, how reliable they are, they have good follow through. You're going to want them to take some of those leadership positions on that steering committee. And then generally having board members on that committee just communicates further to the community at large that this whole endeavor is part of, that it's supported by the board, and that it's an organizational initiative. I also think that it's great to have a board president or a very active member of the board involved in not just the capital campaign, but also in your capital project and the development of your capital project, because sometimes you need someone else to help be the driving force. I mean, I was really helped along this process, which for us was a very long process that changed direction in terms of our building project. And having a board president who was saying, okay, we gotta have the next meeting. We gotta get the next commitment. We gotta talk to the architects. We gotta, just could help, just keep things moving and help push the board to help more. If it's all on the director, you're so overwhelmed with still trying to run your organization and drive the bus of the steering committee and drive the bus of the construction project. It was a great thing to have a president who just sort of was a partner and helped really push when I didn't have any more energy to push. So that was a great thing. And then in terms of keeping the board informed, I think that, like I said, they should be so involved that they're being informed at every board meeting. They're being informed by email updates if it's, you're at a point where it's appropriate to do that. It's good to do that to keep them enthused, as you hit a milestone. It's great to send out an email to the board that just says, hey, this is, we just got a big gift or a big commitment. So I think, but I think that keeping them informed is just part of what you're doing as part of the campaign.
That is great. Thank you, Mary. So bottom line, strong board is essential. John, we're going to go next to you. We've talked a lot about readiness for a campaign, all the steps during the different phases and process. Can you tell us what are the things organizations should keep in mind after running a campaign?
Absolutely. For me, and I think Tracy mentioned it in her earlier comments, the stewardship piece is going to be key in this. Working with those folks who supported your campaign to make sure you're making them feel good about what they did to support you. If there are certain recognition things that you had planned as part of the campaign for these, for your donors, make sure you execute those. Make sure that you've fulfilled any promises that you have that you made as part of the campaign to your donors. The one thing I do want to say is, like, you're hearing so many different sizes and scopes and approaches to campaigns and different campaigns, right? But the fundamentals of planning, executing, administering a campaign, they're all the same across the board, right? Regardless of what your goal amount is, regardless of what your campaign is going to do or support in your organization. So, understand that those fundamentals are always going to be the same. We're all going to be approaching it in the same way. It's just our end game and our end goal may look different. But I think one of the things you should keep in mind after running that campaign is making sure you're stewarding these gifts very well, stewarding these donors, and continuing to keep that relationship going. Campaigns are a certain phase of your organization's time, right? After that campaign is done, you always think about what's next, right? And it may not necessarily be another campaign, but in the meantime, you still got to get your you still want to keep your organization running. And if philanthropy is going to be important in your goals and your mission, after the campaign, you've identified some folks who are going to be supporters of your organization moving forward, right? And then hopefully in the long term. And so I think stewarding and stewarding those gifts and those donors and using that as an opportunity to cultivate those donors into their next gift for you all, right? Or be able to use them in more engaging ways so that way you can get to that point again, I think is going to be very important. And so I think, once the campaign is done, that, it's not completely finished, right? There's going to be a post-campaign type of process, if you will, depending on your organization. And to me, I think one of the key things that we identify is how do we continue to steward properly and well all of these gifts and donors, especially our new donors and first-time donors to the campaign, because campaigns usually identify some brand new folks to your organization. You definitely want to make sure you're keeping those relationships going.
Thank you so much. Next question is for Tracy. I know you're mid-campaign, and so I would like Tracy to answer this, but anyone else who has finished running your campaign of the panelists who want to chime in afterwards, I invite you to do that after Tracy's done. Tell us about mistakes. What mistakes do you think commonly happen or have you made during a campaign, and how can organizations avoid them?
Great. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that I think we made a mistake in not talking about the full extent of the project up front, because our materials now say a goal that we've already met. And also, I think for everyone that's working on fundraising, it feels a little like we have to, and it's another big lift to go through phase 2. So I wish we would have just from the beginning set that large, scary goal that we're now trying to reach. And then as far as other mistakes, I can tell you what I'm afraid of making. And it keeps me, I think, focused on the priorities, which are following up with donors and keeping that relationship in place. So lack of follow-up is a mistake I don't want to make. I don't want for people to not be clear on the impact of their gifts. So, when we started this campaign, it was really trying to visualize what this is going to be for us and what it was going to look like. And, there's artist renderings, and we had an artist put together a watercolor painting of what our, next phase of the farm would look like. And now it's spring and our farm is starting to take shape. So we'll be inviting people out that have contributed so far to tour the site and see the farm, and we'll invite them in each phase as the building goes up. So I want to make sure that people are clear of the impact of their gift, and also then continue to receive our newsletter and annual reports so they know what this new expansion of our farm will enable for our community services. And then the other one that I guess I feel like I'm kind of unclear on, we've been really vocal that this is really a one-time gift that we're asking for, because we're not an organization that needs a lot of ongoing support, because we have a working farm and we do have good grant support. And so we haven't really needed to have ongoing fundraising campaigns, except for to support some of our donations of food into the community. So we've been clear with our donors that we're not going to keep coming back time after time after time. This is really to get us from here to there. This is a one-time investment. And I want that to be true. So I guess that's a mistake that I don't want to make by, expanding the farm in a way that is not sustainable and requires us to have an ongoing fundraising machine.
Thank you. I'm just going to pause our conversation for a sec, just to let our audience participants know that I'm getting to my last question. And so start asking those questions away in the chat. Anything that we haven't covered today, we'll be monitoring the chat and going through those to address your questions here just in a minute. But my final question to all of our panelists, and again, feel free to tag on that mistake question if you'd like to address that as well. But just what's the most important piece of advice, your key takeaway that you would give to people who are considering a capital campaign at their organization? Any one of our panelists would be welcome to jump in.
I can start. I think that from my standpoint, it was really surrounding myself with people who are experts in areas that I wasn't, and really leaning into their expertise to help guide the process. And then having a group of people that were excited about the project as well, because they were your cheerleaders when you kind of stall or things get a little tough. So having that positive network of people around you is critical too, because it's you hit plateaus and then you have to regroup and go at things again. And so having those experts and those groups of support were really critical.
I think it's important to find a consultant who is a good fit for your organization. So in terms of your size and maybe your mission, and what your demographics are for your donors. And I think that you need to take that advice, like Stephanie said, that advice is really invaluable. These people it's proven that their system works, but I don't think you should feel necessarily locked in to every single piece of advice they give you. You know your donors, you know your organization the best. And if you feel like you need to go a different way or make a different, I think you should, that relationship with the consultant is key. You need them to know that, that your organization, and they need to be able to handle the fact that you might say, well, okay, I understand your advice, but, because sometimes they need to be flexible and you need to be flexible. And that can be simple stuff like, we were told, over and over again that your fundraisers have to get people on the phone. They have to call them. Don't even leave them a message. Don't reach them by text or email, because you're going to get the gift if you get them on the phone. And in today's world, it just wasn't true. I mean, there were people that we would have left money on the table if we didn't just decide after they didn't answer the phone that we need to text them or we need to call them because that's their preferred way to, make contact. So, so we had to push back on that point. And another example is in the fundraising pyramids that you'll see if you start investigating capital campaigns. They focus a lot on big gifts, a lot of pressure for big gifts and a lot of expectation that you're going to get to that 50% point Tracy was talking about with your big gifts. And in an animal welfare organization, we're very successful, but our donor base is not about the big gifts. We have very few donors who ever do a 5-figure gift. And, capital campaign consultants telling you you're going to get 6-figure gifts is just an overwhelmingly, that's just deflating. We survive on lots and lots of $25 gifts, from a ton of people. So you need to, that, when you look at your model, if you don't have big givers, that you're going to need a lot of little givers to make that up. But it's not that it's not doable. It's just different. So I encourage people to get a good consultant, but also, know where you need to be flexible.
Well, I'll just speak to the other little organizations out there, because one of the things that we didn't have before this that we needed to invest in before we took this on was a donor database. And we could not do it without it. And maybe everybody on this call already has made that investment, but if you haven't, it's essential.
Yeah, and I think, I echo everything of my fellow panelists have said. I think if my piece of advice is if you've done your due diligence and you've got your goal and you know what you want to do with it and feel that you can make it work, go for it. You never know unless you try, right? I've yet to hear of a campaign that was not successful. So I would say if you've done your due diligence and you feel you've got the capacity, the resources, the bandwidth to be able to do it, go for it.
Thank you all so much. I just want to thank all of our panelists for just their time and consideration. I personally have learned a lot just from hearing about your experiences. At this point, I'd like to move us into our general question and answer session. We have just a few minutes left before we hit 2 o'clock. I see a few questions are coming through in the chat. I've invited my colleague, Kristen. Would you mind voicing these questions so that our panelists can address them?
Sure. The first question we have is, someone wants to know if you can be more specific on what exactly is addressed in a feasibility study.
So I can go, I guess, on that one. So we worked with our consultant to do that, and they actually met with individual donors that we had identified as being potential major donors for the campaign. So they kind of had an initial meeting with them just to gauge their interest, whether it would be something that they would be interested in supporting, at what level, that type of thing. And then when they finished having those conversations, they came back to us and presented a report that said, if you guys want to take on this project, you will be able to raise this money. Or if you want to take on this project, you'll be able to raise this money if this happens, or you're way off target. There's just no way you have the backing from donors to raise the level of funds that you're looking for. So that was really helpful for us because we really didn't have any idea where we would be. But yeah, that's how we used our consultants to help with that piece.
I can add a little bit to that. One of the things that we used, that we did in the feasibility study, which was kind of exactly what Stephanie said, but we also, we had they were able to put in a question because we were curious about whether donors would support, a certain initiative that we had. And, but it wasn't necessarily going to be part of our capital project, but we were interested in whether there would be support for this other initiative. And so they just were able to throw in a couple questions in there in their surveys, because as well as meeting with donors individually, they are also for the lower tier donors, they did kind of an email survey to see what they would support. And so they asked questions about the mission, and we got a great report back that showed us what aspects of our mission donors most resonate with, and what aspects of our mission or this, this new initiative that we articulated, would they support that? So it's a great way to not just find out if there's the money there, but also to find out what aspects of your mission your donors find the most important, or the most, the ones, what do they want to support the most? You can get that information through a feasibility study, and it was really, really helpful.
Great. What do we have next in terms of questions from the audience?
Well, I'm probably going to combine the next two because it's kind of asking the same thing. It's where do you find the consultants? Do they need to be local? Is it okay if they're not local? And what's a ballpark fee for this service?
I'll go again. So we asked other nonprofits that had done the similar types of capital campaigns who they used. We actually had 3 bids come in. A couple were from local consultants, and one was from a firm out of Indianapolis, and we ended up using the firm out of Indianapolis. So I don't think that it ended up mattering that they were not local. I think that our relationships locally were what had the bigger impact on those asks. So that it was mainly their guidance in the process that was super helpful. I believe our fee 10 years ago was close to $25,000-$30,000. So it was definitely an investment that our board had to commit to on the front end, because you might spend that money and then decide it's not a good fit, or it wouldn't be something that we wanted to move forward with. But it was well worth the money. Like I said, they were the experts, and I would agree with Mary that you don't always follow necessarily where they're guiding you, but at least you have that information to have the discussion. So yeah, I don't think that whether they were local or not really made a difference in our particular campaign.
So I'll just share, we did not conduct a feasibility study, so I don't have anything to say on that. We did not hire consultants. We don't have a development person, but we did seek advice from the former director of the Community Foundation, Joan Dixon, before we started the campaign. And then Joan and Angie Hatfield-Marker, now director of Community Foundation, helped us by providing a training for our board and some pep talks and some guidance. And that was hugely helpful for us. Free of charge, so thank you.
And I think we have time for that last question.
Okay, it's what avenue do you use to communicate these fundraising goals to donors? Newsletters, email blasts, press release, media coverage, social media, website, all of the above.
Yeah, I'll chime in on this one. For us, it's all of the above. Any way that we can engage our donors to share the information. I still feel that, even though we live in a very electronic technology age, that there's still something to be said about some of the paper things that we send to donors, right? Like we in the last few years, like we have our own college magazine, right, that we hadn't had in a few years prior to just like a couple of years before the pandemic. And this was a great tool for us to be able to share not just what's going on at the college, but updates on our campaign, updates on the fundraising goals, and so forth. One of the other things that we've decided to step up our game is in the social media space. And we have a few areas here in the college that are a little stronger on the social media space than others, right? Like I think for any of you who are familiar with the University of Illinois, our Marching Illini has a incredible presence on social media, and that's helped actually with their fundraising. And they have an annual campaign, if you will, a giving day every year. And a lot of that is because of their the messages that they shoot out there on social media. So we don't do a lot of press releases on our end. I think a lot of it is if we are either going to break ground on a new building, or if we're doing something, to that nature, is when we would shoot out a press release. But outside of that, a lot of the fundraising goals that we communicate is either through our social media, through our annual updates and newsletters and emails that we send out. So we make it a point, especially during the campaign, that whenever we send a communication to our alumni and donor base, that we're giving a status of where we're at, both at the campus level and at our college level, of where we were at with the campaign in relation to our goal. So that's my long-winded answer to say yes to all of that, all of the above.
Thank you so much, John. We are just about at time, so I want to end with just a couple of announcements and save the dates. So as I mentioned earlier, this session today was our kickoff for this foundational fundraising series. Mark your calendars if your organizations are interested in a deep dive into building endowments. We have 2 sessions coming up in the fall, which we'll be holding in person at Champaign Public Library, Building Endowments 101 and 201. So we invite you to mark your calendars. We'll have a registration form out for those sessions. As they get a bit closer, we do have Sherry Fox from Fox Philanthropic Advisors who will be presenting at the second one. So we hope you can join us for that. And then I just want to finish by thanking again our panelists for being here today. You have greatly enriched our conversation and shared a lot of important information on this topic. So Tracy, Stephanie, John, and Mary, thank you so much for being with us today. And for all of the folks who are in participation as attendees, be on the lookout, hopefully tomorrow, for an email from me with some follow-up handouts. I have a capital campaigns readiness checklist, a case statement worksheet, and some donor prospecting tools to help get you started and for your consideration. The Community Foundation's contact information is here. We invite you to follow us on Facebook. We have a Center for Nonprofit Excellence Facebook group that we'd love you to join the conversation on that and keep posted on upcoming sessions. So thank you again, everyone, and we hope you have a great day.
Wonderful. Thank you. So long.
Thanks.